Hey everyone, hope you're well. How everything's going. Hope your semester's going great. So, all right, so we're starting our next task this week, which is narration and dialogue. And I want to show you a couple things. I'll try to make this one a little bit shorter than some of the other ones. But this week, so we're going to start on narration and dialogue. And you might remember we started last week on the exploration essay. You might recall the granddad piece, the essay at the beginning of chapter 22. So if you think about that paper, you'll remember the first part of that paper had this very unique, um, really descriptive element in which Brian, the person sort of telling or exploring the topic of that story, was sort of describing sort of a scene with his granddad, right? Sort of the subject of the topic of dementia and Alzheimer's. And I'm going to show you kind of an image here really quick. Let's see if I can do this. This is kind of a graphical image. You'll actually see there's kind of a link to it in your Blackboard module this week, but it kind of looks like this. Let me see if I can show you. Hopefully you can see this, but I'm going to try to share it here real quick with you. You know how good I am at sharing. So hopefully you can see this. This is kind of a representation of what an exploration looks like. Maybe you can see these sort of four boxes here. These, if you can kind of imagine sort of the four parts of an exploration essay, begins with this introduction narrative that also includes a dialogue. We're going to be working on this week. This is the first chunk of the paper we're going to be working on. And then the next section was that research section. Um, you're going to have three sources you're going to be using. We're going to actually start working on that next week. And then it kind of wraps up with a conclusion. And of course, at the end of the paper, the end of the exploration, there was sort of a list of the sources uh, you will be using. So you can kind of imagine or just sort of visualize how this exploration paper looks. It kind of looks like this. Again, begins with this narration dialogue, then a research section, then the conclusion, and then lists the list of all the bibliographic sources that you will be using. So if you think about that for 1 second, I'm going to show you just kind of again, kind of zooming out, if you will, on the actual essay. So if we go back and look at this. Let's see, hopefully you can see this. Can you all see this? Hopefully you can see this here. So this is the essay that we've been kind of working on. You saw this last week. This is the talking to granddad piece, right? And you can see, so the beginning section again is the narration part. The narration part, the very descriptive part of your paper, is what we're going to be working on next week. And it's very descriptive. Um, you'll be you probably already you might remember the descriptive narrative piece from chapter 19 that you read, the definition of love. Remember how some of those vignettes were very, very descriptive. Very, very descriptive, just like the beginning of this, right? Remember the buttery popcorn machine, the old people smell, all of the very descriptive parts. And then there's a dialogue here, right? So this is the very first section, the narrative section. That's what we're going to be working on this week. A little bit later on, there's the research part. So you can kind of see how this is put together. The narration, the research, a little bit towards the end, you'll see kind of how it ends with the conclusion, right, where he kind of wraps up, where he says, looking back at my initial visit with my grandfather, I knew that he processed every word I said. And he's kind of wrapping up sort of his visit with his granddad, talking about how, dementia and Alzheimer's affected him. And of course, the very end, where he's listing his bibliographic sources. Much of this we're going to be doing later, but this is how this paper is kind of chunked or put together with these various sections. But again, the part I want you to think about today or this week is this very first section of the narration part and then the dialogue part. Okay, we're going to be working on that this week. Okay, so be thinking about that, the narration and the dialogue. We worked on the narration already a little bit when you studied chapter 19. Um, You're going to be studying chapter 19. You're going to be reading a little bit of narration stuff. You're going to be reading an essay called this Definition of Love. Gets really into this narration and definition kind of elements, right? That you've already kind of seen. And then it's going to end with this dialogue, right? This kind of one-on-one conversation. So thinking about that for a second, I'm going to take you to another chapter here, chapter 43, which talks about using dialogue. So you'll see a couple of different examples of using dialogue, right? Um, and there's a couple of different methods you can use, right? This first example talks about adding dialogue. Of course, you'll probably want to read through this a little bit more when you have a chance to go through the textbook yourself. And this is chapter 43. But this first example, how it talks about two young girls visiting a mall, right? We've probably all done that. And you can see a kind of conversation here within a paragraph. So the paragraph here talks about these girls in a mall, very, very descriptive, and the conversation's happening within the paragraph, right? You can kind of see the girls, looking in the crowd. One says to the other, it's no quote, it's nowhere. One of them explained the mega mall she added was a buzz at first, but now it seems pretty normal. Except my parent, blah, 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 blah. So you can kind of see the quoting, the conversation happening within the paragraph. Some people might say that can be doesn't the conversation doesn't really jump out at you. It might be a little confusing, but this, again, depending on how your essay looks, it's totally up to you. A little bit later on, we're going to be talking about things called rhetorical situations, which means, you know, every person's essay is a little bit different. Some conversations might look or work better in depending on your story or how you're telling the story. So for you, this type of dialogue might work for you. So think about this one. Another type of dialogue is the one you saw in the granddad piece, where it's just kind of a back and forth kind of thing, a back and forth, right? One person says something like, whom do I talk to? She said. And then you can kind of see what's happening after that, right? With the person saying, she would mostly speak to me in Korean. I would answer back in English. Well, the bank manager, who else? What do I say? Whatever you want to say. Don't speak to me like that, she cried. It's just that you should be able to do this yourself, I said. Notice these little kind of asides so you know what the person kind of feels and kind of what they're thinking. Well, maybe then you should consider it practice, I answered lightly. Honestly, to me, this is kind of the best one because you can always tell, what the person's feeling, what the person's saying, seeing, what they're doing in the conversation. I like this one the best. This is the kind of the easiest to follow, but again, it's totally up to you. It's what's ever easiest for you. It's what you think might convey the sort of the easiest sort of conversation to follow for the audience, for your audience. I like this one the best. Another one is something like this. This almost looks like a screenplay, right? This is sort of a conversation between students during the COVID pandemic, right? You kind of see it's a conversation between all these students. One person says, what school did you go to? I attended LaGuardia Community College, right? Sort of a back and forth between a bunch of students. One of the problems with this, if there is a problem, and again, up to you, whoever your audience might be, however you might want to describe it, is sometimes it's kind of hard to see, what the conversation, what the people are thinking, feeling, their emotions, stuff like this. This is just kind of a word for word kind of a conversation, right? You can kind of see the differences between the three. A little bit later on this week, you're going to have an assignment where I'm going to have you think about a conversation with somebody. You're going to be conducting an interview as part of your project. We're going to actually be interviewing somebody. So be thinking about how you're going to integrate a dialogue um, into your essay. Again, we can go back and look at the granddad piece and see how the conversation went between David and his grandfather. Remember how his went, right? His was sort of like that second one I showed you. Hey, granddad, it's me. A slow turn allows him to see the boy now in front of him. You know who I am, right? He stares blankly. I'm Brian, your grandson. So you can kind of see how it's just sort of, you always know who's talking, how each person's feeling. Um, Has grandma stopped by recently? Well, I'll be damned. Right? You can kind of totally picture this conversation. So be thinking about this sort of dialogue as you sort of, right? You're going to be interviewing somebody. Maybe it's going to be a coach or a counselor or a parent or brother, sister. How do you think that conversation is going to look, sound, um, in your paper, right? How is your audience going to see that? How are they going to read it? How are they going to visualize it and hear it and sort of see it, right? I think we talked before on appealing to your reader's five senses. How are they going to sort of interpret your conversation? So be thinking about these different dialogues and things like that. Okay, so narration and dialogue. That's what we're going to be working on this week. Okay, so hopefully that helped. Certainly, if you need anything this week, let me know. So good luck with this part of the paper. Hope you're liking it so far, and we will be chatting with you all soon. Take care.